There are only about a dozen or so black architects practicing their craft in Minnesota, but one of the men who helped to build the Twin Cities was the first African-American architect in the state. In this week's Voices for Change, Maury Glover looks at the career of Clarence Wigington and explains how his work became a cornerstone of our community.
There's just a number of details on the columns and the pilasters that have, little sunburst details and different things carved into the limestone.
Chelsea Heights Elementary is not only where James Garrett went to school in the late 70s and early 80s.
I feel sort of a sense of joy. Brings back memories as a kid, coming and going.
It is also one of his favorite buildings, designed by the man who inspired him to become an architect, a family friend he calls Uncle Cap.
It gave me that confidence that I could pursue this profession, that I knew that I would be a minority, I would be one of very few, but I always had that confidence that, Uncle Cap was extremely successful in this profession, and he left a long legacy for our city and for our family, and this is something that I can also do.
Uncle Cap was Clarence Wigington, who moved from Omaha to St. Paul in 1914. Even though he had no formal training, he became a senior draftsman for the office of St. Paul City Architect and went on to become the first licensed black architect in the state, as well as the first African-American municipal architect in the entire country.
The interesting thing about his sojourn in his career was that he never became, or he never could become, the city architect, given the racial policies of the day. But they leaned on him to organize the office and be the senior architectural draftsman, whereupon he had more to say in terms of the projects that were undertaken.
As the lead on more than 90 civic projects, Wigington made magic out of the mundane, designing everything from schools and fire stations to park buildings across the city. Three of his most well-known works, the Holman Field Terminal Building at the St. Paul Airport, the Highland Park Water Tower, and the Harriet Island Pavilion, which was renamed in his honor, are all on the National Register of Historic Places. He also designed what is now known as the Roy Wilkins Auditorium.
He came in at a time when the city was growing. They had a need for parks. There was a need for schools. There was a need for housing. And he was able to take advantage of that, put his imprint on that, and on other civic structures.
While many of his buildings have stood the test of time, others were meant to be far less permanent. Wigington was also the mind behind a handful of Winter Carnival ice palaces from 1937 to 1947, where he could let his imagination run wild.
These weren't just what we used to call ice forts when we were kids, where you build these little walls and you throw. These were structures designed to entertain humans. You could walk into them. There were rooms. There was a postal box office in one of them where you could send postcards to friends across the country, from that facility. So he was really creative.
Wigington was also a leader in the African-American community, working with both the Urban League and the NAACP. He earned his nickname Cap after he petitioned the governor to form an all-black battalion to defend the home front, because many African Americans weren't allowed to serve in the military during World War I.
We should be proud because he chose the Twin Cities to launch formally his career. And that career supported him from 1915 to 1949 upon his retirement. And during that period of time, he added so much more to the well-being of St. Paul and its citizens than we could probably ever express.
Wigington was the first person James Garrett thanked when he and his business partner won the American Institute of Architects Minnesota Chapter's Gold Medal Award, the highest honor an architect can receive in the state.
We're fortunate as a city to have had him and all the many contributions that he made.
And by following in Wigington's footsteps, Garrett hopes he can create a legacy that lasts just as long.
I'm grateful that he did what he did, and that he left this legacy long after he was gone, for those of us to to grow up here and appreciate, and for those things to just become part of our daily lives.
For Voices for Change, Maury Glover, Fox 9 News.